Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 51 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening here in late July. We are less than a week from the trade deadline in Major League Baseball, and I'm joined, as I often am, by Scott Coleman. Scott, the vibes are pretty rough right now, I have to say, across the board.
Hey, Brad, I am proud to say that win or lose, we record this podcast, good times and bad. I would like to say it builds character when we do these podcasts after oh my God, today's game was a disaster for Atlanta. It was a disaster within like 5 minutes. And we're going to talk about that a little bit and talk about some injury stuff and look ahead to suddenly a very important series against the Mets. But man, I think you're right. The vibes right now are probably the worst they have been all season long.
That definitely tracks. And as you said, we do record this podcast, rain or shine, so to speak. And we are part of the Foul Territory network of podcasts. If you're just finding the show, please search out Hammer Territory anywhere you find your podcast. Please go ahead and subscribe to the show on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, etc., and join and check out the entire network because there's a lot going on in the baseball world. Also, we should say at the top of the show that in addition to Scott and I, you get Stephen Tolbert and Sean Coleman. They did a fantastic show, I thought, pretty in-depth, but also big picture in some different respects on Tuesday evening that's still very much listenable right now. I recommend that at the highest order, plus all of our deadline content from last week. During the All-Star break, we kind of blew it out with some trade stuff, and a lot of that's still relevant right now. Obviously, things have changed a little bit since then, given the injuries to Ozzie Albies and Max Fried, but all of it still applies at this point. You mentioned the game on Wednesday. So we're recording this Wednesday night. It was supposed to be a doubleheader. It only ended up being one game. The afternoon game, game one, happened. And as you said, it was kind of dire. So let's dive into that one, and then we'll kind of go zooming out as this podcast goes along. We'll start here. The Allen Winans experience did not go particularly well, to say the least, on Wednesday. And while the offense was actually decent enough to maybe steal a win, the run prevention, which has been so good for so long for the Braves, was really, really bad on this Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, Winans didn't even make it out of the third inning. And in some ways, he was throwing batting practice out there. It wasn't like he was getting blooped to death. I mean, Cincinnati was just spraying the ball all over the yard. And defensively, the Braves were atrocious today as well. It very much looked like a baseball game that started just after noon. It was bad across the board. I mean, Adam Duvall, you and I have been fans of his for a long time, but it just feels like it is time for Adam. Offensively, it's very, very, very bad. Defensively, especially the last couple of games, he has been terrible defensively in right field, like costing the team multiple runs in back-to-back games bad. There was also just like an all-time blooper play by Zach Short, who's filling in at second base. And I know this team has injuries across the board. Without Austin Riley, it looks like a hangover lineup that you would run out there on September 28th after clinching the division. But between the defensive miscues and Winans just getting torched, which has been the case in a couple of his starts this year in the majors, it was a frustrating game from the very go. And even though the offense did score some runs, which has been such a theme lately, they were not good in executing with runners in scoring position. They left the bases loaded a couple of times. And it was just one of those games where it kind of felt like Groundhog Day, where the Braves had a chance and they just could not figure things out.
Yeah, it did seem like, despite being down big in this one, and by the way, they scored 4 runs in the first 3 innings and still trailed by 3 runs. So ironic, given the way the season's gone, that when they finally did score some runs early in the game, they were still playing behind the 8 ball the entire way, but missed opportunities for sure. Hey, on the bright side, Scott, we should at least try to sprinkle some fairy dust here. Matt Olson had 2 hits today. Signs of life.
I believe Matt had 1 hit over the last like 3.5 weeks or some insane number coming in. So good for him. We'll take the wins wherever we can get them, Brad, even if they are as small as a couple of singles from Matt Olson.
That's right. And you pull the stats. I'm gonna tee you up, but man, the difference between the Braves when they have their big 4 pitchers on the mound versus when they don't has been stark. So Scott, I will give it the stat of the day distinction. Present the people with what you found about the 5th and 6th starter spots.
You and I were just talking before we started the show about just how special this rotation could have been if they had a healthy Spencer Strider all year long. And very sadly, we will not get that. And let's hope Spencer is back and back to his usual self in 2025. But a crazy stat here. And we're at the end of July, so we have a pretty good sample. In games started by the Big Four, Chris Sale, Max Fried, Ronaldo Lopez, and Charlie Morton, the Atlanta Braves are 44-28. Again, games started by the Big Four, 44 wins, only 28 losses, which is fantastic. But in the games started by everyone else, they are 10-18, and the starters in those games have a 6.63 ERA. That is about as stark of a contrast as you can have. And the fact the Braves, I mean, I was tweeting about this the other day. The fact that the Braves are 8 games above 500 at this point in the year is kind of a miracle when you consider the injuries and how bad the starters. I mean, that 10-18 with a 6.63 ERA includes Spencer Schwellenbach.
I was going to say, I almost said that. Literally, I almost cut you off to say, by the way, that includes Mr. Schwellenbach. So we're in lockstep there. But man, that is a wild stat, to be sure.
And Schwellenbach has not been perfect by any means, but when the bar is a 6.63 ERA, he's going to look fantastic. And I think we're all pretty bullish on him. But again, I know a lot of the heavy lifting was done in the first 4 weeks of the season when the Braves got out to a great start. They are now 4 games below 500, I believe, since that last week in April. And it feels like that when you're watching this team every night. The offense continues to just be a train wreck. And it really comes down to if the team can scratch across a couple of runs, because whenever the Big Four have been on the mound, more times than not, even if the Braves can get to 3 or 4 or 5 runs, it feels like they have a pretty good chance. And then whenever they start losing those starts by their better pitchers, you know you're going to lose more times than not when it's not one of the big guys going. It's just been one thing after another with the season. And I mean, even the rain delays or rainouts are crushing this team's roster right now without Max Fried and having to figure out the pitching.
Yeah, that's not an excuse that anybody's going to listen to, and I understand that, but it's a good point to say, it makes life hard on you when you're trying to plan for rainouts and then plan around them, and you get other games postponed, and your bullpen gets taxed, etc. And just for the record, that 44-28 is a 99 win pace. So whenever the Braves have had a pitcher that they trust, basically on the mound, they've been kind of what people expected to some extent. But when they haven't, it's been that rough, and we talked about it a lot at the time, the loss of Strider, but man, the loss of Strider showing up in some respect there. And I'll say this, I actually said this to you before we started recording as well. The Braves, even after today, when they allowed 10 runs, 9 runs to the Reds, they still have allowed the fewest runs in all of Major League Baseball this season. If I told you that preseason, Scott, in the spring, if I said to you, all right, Scott, it's going to be July 24th, the Braves are going to be number 1 in all of baseball in run prevention, what would you have guessed their record was going to be?
I would have told you full stop, knowing everything we knew from a season ago, that they were going to challenge for some like all-time wins records. What was Seattle in 2001? Was it like 116 wins? If you told me with everything we know about this lineup from a year ago, not even a year ago, 9 months ago, all of the projections in the world coming into this season, offensively, that if the Braves are going to have the best run prevention in Major League Baseball a week away from the trade deadline, I would say that they were going to walk to 105 plus wins. And here we are, man. All of a sudden, too, Brad, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. We talk about the Met series. But even the playoff buffer is not very much. Very, very quickly, the Braves have seen this lead dwindle. And all of a sudden, they are another bad week or 2 away from being on the outside looking in to the playoff picture.
Eric Kratz here from FT. I'm a former athlete that really pays attention to his routine. And AG1 every morning before my workouts is something that gets my day going.
Hey, Braun here. AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers daily nutrients and gut health support, and it's backed by multiple research studies so you can trust what you're putting in your body.
Unlike other products which only test their ingredients in isolation, AG1 test their formula as a whole.
Ready for this stat? 97% of people in a research study felt more energy after 30 days of drinking AG1. If I had to recommend one product to support whole body health, it's AG1, and that's why FT is excited to have them as a new partner. Starting your journey with AG1 is a win. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/foul. That's drinkag1.com/FOUL. Go check it out, FT fam.
That was a good point of transition, Scott, to just look ahead at this coming week. We'll talk about kind of, odds and ends in a second with Michael Harris going the 60-day IL, et cetera. But it's too obvious of a transition point here. You mentioned it, but they're only a game and a half up on the Mets at this point, and the Mets are number 2 in the wild card hunt. The Braves are still leading the wild card race, but they're only 2.5, 3 up on the final wild card spot. And also, their Fangraphs playoff odds are down to 82%. And 82% is really high, of course. That's a good probability. That's more than 4 out of 5 times you get in the playoffs, but that is their lowest percentage all year, which makes some sense when you lose 4 games in a row, as the Braves just did. And they factor in some of the injury stuff, I'm sure, at Fangraphs. God willing, Austin Riley's back in the lineup pretty soon. That would help at least a little bit here to the punt lineup that we saw the last couple of days. But it's gotten real very quickly, because I know as recently as a couple of weeks ago on this podcast, I was telling people on the show, offline, et cetera, like I was still quite confident of the Braves making the playoffs. Now, making the playoffs is not the same thing as winning the East, but they were in a great position, 90+% playoff odds, et cetera, and they're still the favorite to make the playoffs, to be clear. In my opinion, in the opinion of the projections and the betting markets, et cetera, but it is no longer a comfortable spot with how they're playing, with how the roster looks, 2 more injuries, all that stuff. Like, it is definitely, for the first time, I would say, this season, I am legitimately worried about missing the playoffs, I got to say.
Yeah, I am too. And that's a different tone than what you and I have had for basically the last month or two, even as the team has really struggled, especially during the offensive downturn in May. And then it seemed like in June they were going to come out of it a bit. And here we are in July talking about a team that cannot score runs consistently. You look at the National League wildcard standings right now, the Braves do lead, although with this 4-game losing streak, they are only a game and a half up on the Mets, who have been red hot over the last month and a half. The St. Louis Cardinals have been playing really good baseball. They are currently the 3rd wildcard team. They are virtually tied with the Padres, who are playing better baseball. The Diamondbacks are seemingly figuring some things out. And the Pittsburgh Pirates are also red hot. They have probably been the hottest team in baseball over the last few weeks. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 5 teams within 4 games of the Braves for a playoff spot. It seems like you're effectively going to have 6 clubs battling for 3 wildcard spots in the National League. And that's a little scary for a team that has all of these injuries right now. And at the end of the day, if you tell me the Braves are going to get Max Fried back, if they're going to get Michael Harris back at some point in August, maybe Ozzie Albies comes back, maybe they make some trade additions, and I still, in my heart of hearts, feel like this is going to be a playoff team. And it's a roster that could make a deep run if a few things bounce their way. But you have to get in first. And the way this team is playing right now, it would be silly and naive to just assume now that they are an automatic shoo-in for the playoffs.
Yeah, I think everything you just said there is right. I feel the same way. If you listen for a long time, you may know this, but I am not a fan of the expanded playoffs. As a general rule, I think it devalues the regular season. And in baseball, the ultimate large sample size sport, I think it would be better if the better teams won more often in the playoffs, which means having less teams in, less variance, et cetera. But hey, this time around, Scott, perhaps it will shine on the Braves. It's the first time on this Braves podcast that I would say that it might actually help the Braves to have the expanded playoffs. How about that?
I will say this, Brad. After all of the regular season greatness that we have watched over the last 6 years, and we know what happened in 2021, which was probably their worst on-paper team
of the whole time,
or at least second worst. Yeah, I think the 2018 team was a year ahead of their schedule, and it was a great story, but that roster was just not loaded. But regardless, If the Braves go on a crazy deep run into the playoffs as like the wild card 3 team this year, I don't know if I'm ever going to truly get worked up ever again about a regular season game, just knowing that at the end of the day, you just have to get into the playoffs. I say that half joking. Of course, I'm going to tune in every night and I love watching the Braves, and it's just such an ingrained part of the summertime months. But it would be incredibly on brand for this team to somehow limp into the playoffs and then go on some crazy like 10-2 run and make the World Series. I mean, would it be the craziest thing in the world, Brad?
Oh no, definitely not. I mean, and that's the thing that we could say with straight face. I think people that know us will know this already, but we don't just say things to gas people up or just to have a podcast topic. Like we generally just don't do that. We're not going to do that. We're not going to do the hot take stuff in either direction. We're not going to, again, gas you up at all. But there is something in me that's like, hey, this team is still better than it's been so far. Like I can't shake that feeling. I think just the logic of everything that's gone on with the bats, it doesn't make sense to me in my brain. It's broken my brain, I think, at this point in time in late July. But I still trust Alex. I still trust the guys that are healthy and walking for the Braves right now between Sale and Lopez on the mound, et cetera. Morton is the supporting guy, all that. I still think that there's some danger in this team in a good way. I think this is a dangerous team in a positive way, but at the same time, people are probably sensing that different tone from us about like I said it before, but I will say it again. It's the first time all year that I've really thought about the Braves missing the playoffs, like in a serious way. And I still would pick them. As you just said, I totally agree with you. Like they are still the favorite to make the playoffs. If you didn't think that, you could make some positive money in the betting market because they are a big underdog to miss the playoffs at this point in time. But yeah, it would be on brand. It would be on brand in a baseball way that I don't love, to be honest. But yeah, there's that door being open. That's maybe the positive, and that's why baseball, by the way, has done what it's done with the playoff expansion. Is that there are more fan bases, there are more teams, there are more cities that have optimism going into late July than there used to be, and obviously Atlanta's in a different spot because they were supposed to be good, and the vibe as we led the podcast with is really, really not good right now around the Braves. But there is that little bit of a fallback in a way that there probably wouldn't have been because guess what? They're 9 games behind the Phillies. And a lot of different seasons back in my youth and maybe your infancy, it would have been a season over, whereas it's not right now.
Yeah. Yeah. In some ways, the expanded playoffs might be the Braves' saving grace, at least for this year. They, of course, have not needed that. Since 2018, they have, in just about every year, comfortably won the division. And that might not be the case this year. And you know what? That's the first goal that we all set out whenever the Braves break camp is to hopefully see this team win a division title and then make the World Series and then win the World Series. But maybe that's just not in the cards this year. And who knows, man? I mean, if this team does sneak into the playoffs and flames out in 2 games in the first round, I don't think anyone would be surprised. In some ways, it might be kind of relieving just to, kind of put a bow on this very snake bitten season. But at the same time, just history, I don't want to beat the same dead horse, but history has shown time and time again, you just have to find a way into the playoffs and get hot for a couple of weeks because the best team does not always win. It's just really just a matter of how the baseball is going to bounce. And if you have a couple of pitchers who are hot and are pitching well, you can ride them. You get some heroics out of guys you don't expect from. And who knows where the Braves are going to be 2.5 months from now. But I really am hopeful this team starts to figure it out. I'm not necessarily optimistic at this point, just because it has been a disaster in the start the second half, Brad. I mean, they are Eddie Rosario hitting a baseball 2 feet shorter in the first game of that Cardinals doubleheader from being 0-5 to start the second half. That is concerning and troubling.
We're on the same page there. I think that clearly no one would be spun into thinking that they've been playing pretty well recently. They haven't been. It's been really rough. I still think that, there's something in me that's like, man, they can't be this bad. And maybe I'm the fool. I got to say, maybe my common sense brain, my numbers, my large sample size brain won't allow me to get there. But I still think that they're better than this. But we should be objective. You and I kind of had dueling, snarky, funny tweets about this today when the lineup came out. Like, imagine thinking this lineup was going to be playing for the Braves in July. I mean, it really is a comical situation that they're in. injury wise. And I think you made this point, or Steven did, or maybe both of you guys did in different respects. But I think it's almost been underplayed how bad the injuries have been for the Braves this year. Like it really has been like almost undersold, and we've definitely brought it up a lot. And I think we could be accused of that. That's perfectly fine, but it really is kind of hilarious how banged up they've been, especially when you go back to Strider and the start of all of that. And a reminder, by the way, that he was the Cy Young favorite preseason in the betting market. And then from there, everything else that's happened. And, speaking of which, Michael Harris is now on the 60-day IL. And that doesn't mean he's going to be out forever, but like he's not playing again for at least 3 more weeks. Like that all that was a procedural move, but it's just a reminder that he's going to be gone until mid-August at least. And that's just another one.
Yeah, it's a bummer that at the very earliest, Michael Harris will be back on August 14th. So 3 weeks from now. It sure seemed like before the Braves went out west in that final week of the first half that Harris was going to be on a rehab assignment like any day. He was working out pretty intensely in the outfield, and by all accounts, he was doing fine. And here we are, and he's still not cleared to sprint, which is going to be a big hurdle for a hamstring. It sounds like he's done a little bit of work in the batting cage, but hasn't like really let it rip. And I am sure the Braves are being cautious because hamstrings are something that can become re-injured, and that's the last thing you want. But the fact that at bare minimum, the Braves are going to be without their very talented center fielder for at least 3 more weeks was just kind of a bummer. It just kind of came across on a tweet today that the Braves moved him to the 60-day. I think it almost went under the radar a little bit until a few people were like, wait a minute, they just lost Harris for yet another 3 weeks guaranteed, if not longer. It really is. I mean, snake bitten, I think, is the perfect way to describe what this team is this year.
Yes, and it will help if nothing else, the optics of the lineup when Riley is back in there. And by the way, congratulations to Austin Riley on the paternity list that he joined. That's usually a good thing, obviously. But at the same time, his absence was felt even more with the lineup and all that stuff. And we'll leave it there. They do have a roster spot open for Thursday. By the time people listen to this podcast on Thursday, we might already know who's going to be coming up to fill it. But they did some transaction bingo today with Zach Logue and Daysbel Hernandez to go along with Harris. But we'll see what they do there. Probably a bullpen arm, you would imagine. I don't know.
I would assume a bullpen arm of some kind. The Braves do need a starter, but not until Monday with all of the
it was supposed to be Thursday for the record. Like it was a TBD on Thursday, but then when Sale didn't pitch tonight, they just said, all right, Sale tomorrow and go from there.
So presumably it will be Bryce Elder on Monday against, I believe, the Milwaukee Brewers.
Feel the buzz for Bryce Elder on the mound again, Scott. Feel it.
If I think AJ Smith, riveting. I think AJ Smith-Shawver is going to get one more rehab start with Gwinnett. It sounds like his stuff is really good, but the command has not been there quite yet, which makes sense considering he missed quite a bit of time with the oblique injury. So I'm guessing that Smith-Shawver will probably make one more rehab appearance this weekend and then presumably become the Braves' 5th starter, at least as long as Max is out, because I don't know about you. I think I know your answer, Brad, but I mean, if it's between Bryce Elder and AJ Smith-Shawver, I will take Smith-Shawver every single day of the week.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. As noted, Bryce Elder skeptic, even though I guess maybe I turned into a Bryce Elder defender recently when people decided that he was like the worst pitcher of all time. He isn't, but he's not that good either. So yeah, we're on the same page there. I think the upside with Smith-Shawver is quite a bit higher, and that would be a guy that we'd like to see. But goes without saying, like they need Max Fried back. We know that already. We covered that over the weekend when we talked last. So did Steven and Sean. And Fried's absence, we'll get updates there hopefully in the coming days, and he'll be back. But until he is, it's nice to have Sale being awesome, and Lopez has been great all year, and Morton's been totally fine. But yeah, not the best, we'll say. Speaking of which, we should get out of here. But the Mets series we teased already a little bit begins Thursday. Sale's on the mound for that one against Luis Severino. Then it's Charlie Morton on Friday against the season debut of Kodai Senga, who was quite good for the Mets last year. He's been hurt all year long. He's going to pitch on Friday, it seems like, for New York. And then Schwallenbach on Saturday and Lopez on Sunday. So on the bright side, Scott, to bring it full circle, none of the let's just say, how do I put this? None of the guys that people don't want to see are pitching this weekend. It's only,
Yeah, I
it's only,
mean,
it's three of the big four and Schwellenbach.
well, and I think Schwellenbach is pitching well enough that whenever he's out there, I feel pretty confident now.
Yeah.
Maybe that's me being foolish with knowing that this offense has been so anemic for the better part of the whole season now. But you're right. It is the four starters that you feel comfortable and confident in right now. And they're going to need them to pitch well because I think pretty quietly, the Mets have one of the better lineups in the National League and even all of baseball this year. Francisco Lindor moved to the leadoff spot a while ago and has been fantastic. They hit for power, they get on base. Imagine that. And as we said earlier, the Braves are only a game and a half up on the Mets, who are the wild card two at the moment. So hopefully getting to New York will kind of help wake this team up a little bit, get some fire. I'm not sure when Austin Riley will be back from the paternity list. And as you said, congrats to him. But it will be good to get Austin back. And we are, as folks are listening to this, Brad, we are only 5 days away from the trade deadline. So we could see some movement at any given point in the next couple of days. And we will see what Alex and team are thinking about this deadline, because I said it the other night and I'll say it again. I would be truly fascinated to know what kind of conversations the front office is having right now. What kind of players they looking at? Are they thinking short term, long term? There are so many different ways this team could go. And of course, if a trade and when a trade happens, we will be here to podcast about it as well.
That's right. And we agree. It's the first time the Braves will face the Mets in like 2.5 months. It was mid-May last time they played. That's the last time they played, which seems like a long time ago because it was. The Braves at the end of that series were 24-13. So a lot's happened since then. Not most of it not that great for Atlanta, but yeah, we're in a good spot as far as the podcast is concerned. Not necessarily the Braves, but we'll have coverage of all things. Again, there was deadline talk yesterday from Sean and Steve. We kind of eschewed it on this podcast, but there's plenty of that for sure. We'll have more of it coming up, and we'll see what the Braves do. I still think that if I had to bet right now, they're going to do something to add to this team. I know there's the sentiment that's kind of going away from that with the way they've been playing recently, but I still believe that Alex and company see this. There are degrees of adding, we should always say. I'm not sure that they're going to go with a big splash addition, but I think that they're probably going to still add something because the metrics probably tell you like they're too good not to. But we'll see. TBD.
Yes, and man, talk about Alex gets paid the big bucks, but talk about a sports executive who has some really big decisions to make in the next 5 days. You cannot just, maybe he can, I guess he can, but it would be pretty surprising and disappointing to me if he just sat there and did nothing.
You and I agree on that, I will say, but I'm sure you've seen this too. There is definitely a sentiment out there in the fan base that's like, why would they buy? This team stinks. And I have a hard look, I usually would make fun of that. It's hard to make fun of that right now, I would say, because the way they've been playing. I don't agree with that. I still think that they're too good to not buy. And we said it earlier, but they're still the number one wildcard team right now. And in a vacuum, this is not a vacuum, but in a vacuum, the number one wildcard team is going to buy. You know what I mean? You're not going to sell or hold tight when you are in that position, generally speaking, even if it was a roundabout way to get there.
Yeah, if I had to bet, and I know we're getting deep into this podcast here, and shout out to everybody still listening. If I had to bet, I'm guessing that Alex is going to make a handful of moves that are all kind of on the margins. I'm not sure he's going to push a bunch of chips in to go get a Luis Robert or a Randy Arozarena or a Garrett Crochet. I don't think he's going to do that, but I'm guessing he's going to do his usual Alex Anthopoulos thing and look under a couple of rocks that maybe nobody else is really looking underneath and just add something to this roster, some depth, some pieces that maybe aren't perfect, but could potentially fit the puzzle the Braves are trying to put together, especially over the next few weeks and months with all the injuries they have. And presumably those are not going to cost a lot. Those trades would not cost a whole lot in prospect capital. So you're not really mortgaging any future by making those additions. You are giving the current year's team a slightly better chance, or maybe a marked better chance of winning and advancing in the postseason without having to unload 3 of your top 8 in a relatively thin farm. And then you would be able to go into the winter having a full cupboard of options and flexibility.
Yeah, I think we agree on that. And only time will tell in the next 6 days as we are talking here on Wednesday evening into Thursday. Scott, thanks for being here. I appreciate you. Just for a peek behind the scenes, we recorded much later than we usually would because I am traveling and my schedule is brutal right now, and Scott is flexible. And thank you, Scott, for being here.
It is my pleasure, Brad. You do amazing things to make yourself available to record a podcast for the people.
I should at least admit what I did on Sunday. I didn't say it at the time. I recorded from my car on Sunday, which was quite an experience. Hey, I'm sure the audio quality was top notch. It was not, but hey, it worked. People hear me. So,
you know what? We love talking about this team, and that's why whenever we hear from people who, have listened to the podcast, whether they're new listeners or they've been listening for years and years, going back to the Talking Chop days, it's why we appreciate it so much. It's why we do these shows. I'll be honest, if we were just talking into the abyss and nobody was ever listening, I don't know if we would be on like year 7 of doing these shows. But here we are. It's for the real ones who tune in, win or lose. And damn it, Brad, let's hope this team wins a couple of games here, because these shows after getting thumped by the Reds just are not, the most fun to talk about, or I'm sure listen to.
It's giving me big 2016 vibes when Carlos and I used to recap losses and rebuilding. But anyway, we'll hold off on that for a later date. Scott, people can find you on Twitter/X where?
Scott Coleman 55, tweeting out all of the Braves hot takes. It's also almost fantasy football season, so you can get the fantasy football takes, always random television and movie takes as well. But we have a good time. Even when people are like actually losing their minds and saying that Alex Anthopoulos should be fired and Brian Snitker should retire tomorrow and make Travis d'Arnaud the acting player manager. I got that one 2 days ago. But I get it. Fandom, fans are fanatics for a reason. And let's just hope this team starts to win a few ball games.
Yes, that would be fun for sure. If you'd like to, you can follow me on Twitter/X at BT Rowland. Follow the show at Hammer Territory, and please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you might find podcasts. Leave 5-star ratings and reviews. That's very much appreciated. You can email us if you'd like to at hammerterritory@gmail.com. If you have questions, send it to us on Twitter as well. And check out Steven, check out Sean. We are doing the Lord's work, hopefully, and covering the team in a comprehensive fashion. We'll have more coming up later on this week. Thanks again to Scott for being here. Thanks again for listening, as always, on this podcast, and we'll see you all next time.